First of all, I want to say it's a privilege to give a talk in Frank's honor. As a father of Texas regional architecture, we share that interest, of course, in what's called critical regionalism, I guess, which is a tricky handle. So really, the architecture of place. So Frank's work was all about that, as is ours. And for me, just to put it out there at the beginning, my definition of place is landscape, climate, and material culture. If you're branded as a critical regionalist, then there's this idea that you're being provincial, which is a kind of negative. And however, one time Kenneth Frampton, when he was writing about our work, said it was a form of resistance to the numbing effects of globalized culture. So that I like that definition. He also Kenneth, he said something else about our work one time. He said there are the facts of a region, and then there's the mythopoetic potential of a region, which is a lot more interesting. Facts matter, by the way. But so the idea of regionalism is tricky in the sense that it seems to prioritize the local. And I think there are a lot of false dichotomies in architecture right now, and one of them is this false dichotomy of the local and the autonomous, or the non-local. So our work is really straddles between those things. It's extremely local and extremely, aiming for the archetypal or timeless or international, the classic. Another false dichotomy, I think, is this idea of, slides would be good now, tradition versus modernity. I'm going to talk about that a little later. To me, there's no contradiction there. Octavio Paz, the great Mexican poet, said, "Taken alone, tradition stagnates and modernity vaporizes. When taken together, modernity breathes life into tradition, and tradition responds by providing depth and gravity." So we should always leave the writing to the writers like him. Another one that I know is important to all of us who live on this side of the pond is this idea of the false dichotomy between highbrow and lowbrow culture. We are hopelessly committed to this idea of democracy in North America, and this idea that all culture derives from the poor. So we'll talk about that some more tonight too. So it's called The Village Architect. So here's a piece of outsider art, folk art. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a trip from our village, our farm where we live, and in increasing circles out from there and then back again. So the talk will go out from the village and back to the village. Of course, village architect sounds a lot like village idiot, and I think some people in our village probably see that as more relevant. I grew up in a village like this called Arcadia, and it's a place where my ancestors had lived, at least some of them, for over 400 years, and depending on how you count, 12,000 years. So it's a cultural landscape that I'm very familiar with. And when I went to architecture school, I was told that had nothing to do with architecture and that I was a hick and I had no reason to be there. And so that gave me the anger to practice till I was about 40. That kept me going to prove them wrong, right? So I'm going to be a really good hick and give them the finger. So the village that we ended up living in after we traveled, we lived abroad for a number of years, and from a little place you gotta get out of town, right, for a while. And then came back to Nova Scotia and found another village, or what used to be a village on the same coastline. So we bought a little piece of land in this place. So you'll see that the drawing right here is really the lecture. Here we are. We're going to go out, and then we're going to come back to where we started. So the village I'm going to talk about tonight is this village, not the village where I grew up, but the village where after moving back to Canada, we've worked. So this is that village. One of our daughters and her husband and 3 of our grandchildren live here. We live back here. And there are 40-some buildings by our practice in this place. It's like being the bishop's architect in some medieval town or something. So the first project we did, well, you can see here, actually, the first thing we did was I spent the first years back studying the vernacular landscape, in particular how buildings aggregate to make courtyards and microclimates in villages and so on. So this is actually the courtyard, a sketch of the courtyard of what is now our daughter's farmhouse there. So I'd worked for Charles Moore, which, had its issues. So we had to do a Pomo thing. So we went back and tried to reconnect with where my ancestors had lived for thousands of years. And we found this old 1750s house, and we renovated it and made a 21-room house, a 13-room house into a 1-room house. A little crazy. And then a number of years later, we ripped all that shit off of it, all that modern, all that postmodern stuff, and took it back to a kind of proper 1750s house so we could have our grandchildren living in it, which is a pretty good deal for Marilyn and I. So a folk artist in Prince Edward Island made a model of the house. So the kids, that's their dollhouse. You see 3 of our grandchildren playing in the dollhouse. And there's Henry out front learning to mow the lawn. So again, that's that same courtyard. And I can say our whole practice has kind of grown out of that village and out of that barnyard. We went over the hill and we found a forest, and in the forest we found 35 ruins from a village that had been there, turns out from probably 1500 or earlier. And I was, as a professor, young professor, I was angry about architectural education, the way it was going. And so I went to school one day and I said, close your eyes and imagine the ghost of a lost village at the end of the earth, and let's get the hell out of here and go build something. So we went and found a ruin from the early 1500s, which now has the name Sky Room, but we built the first ghost project there, which is a kind of design build program, architecture program. So that was really, when we found this ruin with the central chimney in it, we went back and ripped all the rooms out of this thing and made a 1-room house so it would be like that ruin. So that was 40 years ago. This was 1994, and the person sitting on the beam there, that's my partner, Talbot Sweetapple. Now, it was his first architecture student. So we did a bunch of these projects. We did them every summer. Usually the budget was like $800 or something like that. And it became a kind of thing, a kind of international architecture school, written up as the top kind of alternative architecture school in the world at one time. So just out of nothing, out of anger, really. So the Sky Room that we found was here, one of those ruins, and the Sky Room as it is today is on the right. So after 35 years, we went back and revisited that ruin and tried to idealize it and restore it. And then the usual village idiot, like architect, more money than brains, why would you do that? Why don't you just bulldoze that thing? And of course, now it's my wife Marilyn's favorite place, so it was worth doing. So it's called The Sky Room, and there's a novel, it's weird to be in a novel, but it's a novel written about that place. And so this is what it looks like today. And it's the kind of navel, it's the kind of center of our world, where we got the idea to ruin the 1750s house and the idea for the ghost slab there. And that is a real shooting star, it's not Photoshop. So this was where Champlain landed the first time in the New World, the first time, 27 trips he came, this was the first trip. And he wrote when he got there in his diary, I'm not surprised to see the French fisherman's house because the fishermen in Dieppe and Saint-Malo have said they've been coming here already for 150 years. That was 1604. So since the 1400s, and before that it was the Basques and so on because of the fishery. So there's deep, deep history here like there was in the house, the 400-year-old house that I grew up in that was built by my ancestor a couple hundred miles away from this. So this is what we found, and we started building next to in the Ghost Lab. It was always a venue for a concert, a public event. These were usually the kind of working drawing kind of quality we had. So you can see, quite literally, in a week, we would go from a sketch to a building. So the little sketch on the right is the first sketch. The primitive, if you like, the one on the left. The one here is the actual construction documents. And then we'd have a big lobster meal, and we'd have a concert. And it started harmlessly. We'd had, unintentionally, people would come. We were getting ready to pack up our tools and go home, and 200 people came with bagpipes and fiddles and stuff. And with 4 bottles of beer the first night, it was an all-night party of 200 neighbors. So then we started, then it became the bagpipes, and then it was 1,000. It got to be 1,000 people would come to the bagpipes, and then it was not just the local guys with the fiddles, but it was like recording artists. We even invited Springsteen. He didn't show. So we built these things in the landscape. Sam Bachby at the Rural Studio was a friend, and we talked a lot about this stuff, but this wasn't the Rural Studio. This was a different cultural context. This was about poetry of landscape, but also the cultural act of building. Juhani Palasma talked about ghost as, he wrote an essay about it called The Dance of Construction, and where he said that there's nothing more optimistic than building. And I said, Juhani, that sounds good, but you're not right, because we'd had our first grandchild by then. I said, making another human being actually probably trumps architecture, but it's pretty good. So this is the kind of sketch we would do. This was a sketch with 25 people, albeit me holding the pencil. And you can see the energy of that party drawing for Go 6 in the sketch. You can't recreate that. So social art, team sport, design build. That's Wendell Burnett up there. Somebody who's, I'm sure, spoken here. Another party sketch on the right. Then we thought we needed, if we're going to have a school, we need a campus, we need some housing, so we built all these cabins in a week, designed them in a week, framed them in a week. The first sketch, Juhani talks about feeling the power of the land, the geology in the buildings, that the buildings actually explain the landscape. The working drawings. There's Juhani and there's Marilyn Blackwell. And you can see the girl from Maryland trying to kill the Scottish woman there with a piece of hemlock she's throwing. Then we built a studio. We thought we needed a studio. We needed a dining hall so 50 people would eat there. And we live in this now. We've lived in all these buildings. 1 week to design it. We poured concrete on a Saturday. The next Saturday night we had 50 people having supper in it, and we had 1,000 people in the courtyard. Ooh, that crapped out on us. This is a great party, but you wouldn't know it. That's, wow. Gee, never seen that happen before. Okay. So the studio, all the steel put up in one day by 4 women. another ghost project. The 1-to-1 model and the 1-to-50 model, and the partie sketch, this time a section. And then Ghost 11 was a community building, and the guest architect that time was Francis Carré, who was from Africa, who won the Pritzker a couple of years ago. We always brought a guest critic or scribe, and we also always brought a guest architect. So this is a barn that we rescued and rebuilt, and now it's the kind of community space, because we know that the ultimate purpose of architecture is community. So this is a place where community events happen. Put this up in a week, so we had a concert in it. We had sticks on the ground, and then exactly a week later we had a concert in it. In Ghost 13, we had a conference where we brought back all the guests, all the speakers from over the years. So you see Ken Frampton there, you see Johanni Plasma, you see Jim Dow from Dow Bilch, you see Ingrid from Norway, you see Patricia Packow, Steve Badanes, Robert McCarter, Andrew Freer there, Tom Kundig peeking over the top. It was Wendell, Marlin, Tom Fisher, good gang, Glenn Murkett, Vince James, Jennifer, Bridget Shim. It's a good crowd. If you set off a bomb in there that week, you would have done some damage. And it was the first time these three elders ever got together. And elders are a very important idea for me. So that's Johanni, Glenn Murkett, and Kenneth Frampton meeting for the first time. And then a person's Carwin in the pond. So there's John Grable from Texas there's Tom Kundig and the whole gang pulling the car out. There's Peter Stutchbury from Australia, and Peter Buchanan, the historian who's now died. So after Ghost, we kept on building stuff because it's a kind of compulsion. So this is an old schoolhouse. The barn was a barn I drove by as a child in the Annapolis Valley, and so it was going to be torn down because the mothers in the village didn't want it falling down on their kids when they were smoking dope. So they we're going to burn it, and so we bought it for not much, and we rebuilt it in a week. And then there was another building in our village, which was a one-room schoolhouse that was also, cows were living in it, so the floor had rotted out, and it was cow shit up to the first foot. And so we had to save that. So it's like stray cats, you know. Doris Day used to save stray cats, and buildings, unfortunately, are a little more expensive. And so it's a farm now. I spent 25 years clearing the land, blew through a hip joint and some stuff. And people come over the hill now and they say, "You're so lucky." I say, "Yeah, right." It's a lot of Saturdays I should have been with my kids, right? But anyway, act of will. So there it is, the schoolhouse before and after, and this is the timber frame that we erected. That's it was really a two-room schoolhouse. That was high school upstairs, and that's our kind of our best bedroom that we lived in for a while. Then we built this. We had a lot of young when you've been a teacher for 40 years, you get and an employer for a long time, you get a lot of people copying your work, which kind of everybody says a compliment, but it kind of pisses you off too. So we thought, okay, we're going to do the little house, going to show people how to do a little house. So this is a 600 square foot house called Enough House, which sleeps 7. And we built it real cheap out of Core 10. It was going to be shingled, and Todd Williams was staying in the schoolhouse with me, and we got frozen in one winter, and I said, "Todd, what should we do, shingles or Core 10? He said, "Well, yeah, mix it up. Yeah, go for the Core 10. So we did. So this is the partie drawing. I love doing these. This is my thing, these partie drawings. Point of departure, from the French verb partir. So the red is Core 10, obviously, and then It's up on fins, so it's a kind of iconic version of itself. Raises this issue of tradition versus modernity. So you see the 1830 schoolhouse on the left and the 8-year-old intern cottage or enough house on the right. So we're getting a campus out of all this after a while. So there were 35 ruins, and we didn't build on any of the ruins. We built in around the ruins. So we got this campus going, and we did all these other buildings and the landscape around it. And then we started building on the point, but this time we weren't the owners, we weren't the developer. We sold the land to people who had drank some Kool-Aid, wanted some architecture, and to be part of a community. So I had to convince people to buy land all like sardines. So this is 3 houses, there are 9 buildings out there. So this one is called the Point House, and it's a kind of zero detailing. So it's kind of the oldest detailing, 1600s, no corner boards, Boston corners. So it's super minimal, super modern. So we keep doing experiments on the farm or near the farm like this. And those experiments find their way into other projects the firm does. This one's called the Smith House. So the client came and they stayed in the little enough house, and they had this coffee in the sky room, and they said, "Can we have some of each of those things?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So we did this Corten and stone thing, and then all the architecture critics said, "Brian's losing his mind again." And he he puts buildings on stilts. What's he doing with the stone? What's that all about? So there's some stone. That's a 5-ton mantle stone on top, which is cheap. You realize that the smaller the pieces you make out of a piece of stone, the more expensive it is. So if you don't try to cut it up, it's way cheaper. Somewhere along the line, it took, I guess, about 20 years to figure out that if you take the sky if you crop the sky out of the space, that the ocean is big. The ocean's the big deal, because you take, amateur photography is Aunt Ethel there, and then there's like a whole lot of sky. So we cut the sky out. So this is really an ode to Glenn Murcutt's Marie Short House. And so is a living pavilion, which is a true pavilion, and is a night pavilion, a private one, that is where you sleep, and it's more like a cave. So cave versus pavilion. And I love, we designed all the furniture too in this thing, so that all those tables and stuff. Live edge is nice to look at, not very nice to belly up to. So there's there's something going on with the images. They're all these funny letters and numbers. Anyway, there's the party, the plan. And so then the village, the campus on the right becomes a village and campus together with these other buildings on the left. So it's getting pretty dense out there. We're not done yet. We're building 6 buildings probably in the village this year. For clients now, using their money helps. So then 10 years ago, I drew this drawing, and while we were doing the intern cottage, enough house had this idea about doing an extension to the studio, which we've now done. And our son Matthew is an architect, and our daughter Renee is a structural engineer, and our other daughter Allison helps me with the sheep. So we work with the kids all the time. But anyway, so Matt worked with me on this to make this 100-foot tin can into a 200-foot tin can. And the rear end of it is just the wood storage. There's about 3 quarts of wood there. There's the plan. One time I was watching a PBS special on our work, and it was Brad Pitt made it, and I didn't seen it before, and I'm watching it on TV, and then Kenneth Frampton shows up, talking head, and he says, "The architecture of Mackay, Lyons He's banal. So I thought, oh, we're in trouble now, he's the man and it's banal, it's not good. And then he said, when you achieve the banal, it looks like the building was always there. So that was better, he recovered. So this is the super banal. And when Frampton comes, he always likes to stay in this one, this is what we was going on about banal, because the roof is the counterform of the land. And the Wano pitch is something that we started doing because it was just the cheapest thing you could do. Putting the buildings on fins, half as much concrete, and if you're in a tidal zone, then the ocean comes and goes under the building instead of washing it away, and so on. So we started doing these. And the climate forces you into taut skin primary forms, because if you put an overhang, because it's not cold in Nova Scotia, you get freeze-thaw, wet-dry, 265 freeze-thaw cycles a year. So if you put an overhang, the snow won't melt over the overhang, but it'll melt over the house and it'll back up into the house. So you get ice dams and you get leaks. So the way not to have leaks, ironically, is to take the overhangs away. So I cleared all this land too. This is my buddy's cows on there right there. The little house we did for $46,000 over on the left. Client said, I love my house, but it's a 400 square foot house, right? But I love my house, but what I can't understand is why my house costs so much. $46,000. This one's called The Sliding House. It's in the village. It's kind of an essay on the ocean horizon meets the topography of the hill. It's all about accentuating the ocean horizon. And the partie drawings on the right are really about how I search for the kind of essence of things in a partie drawing. So you feel like the ocean horizon's going to cut you in half at the waist. Here's another one in the village called Hill House. The precedent for this was really a Neolithic farm in the Hebrides in Scotland, a hilltop farm. So is it local or is it not local? There's the partie, all messed up too by this whatever happened to the images, something happened to them. It still kind of works as a partie. And there I am drawing this section on the beach with a stick. Doesn't matter what tool you use to make a partie. You can use a computer, you can use a charcoal, you can use a stick. I even did one time peeing into a snowdrift. Doesn't matter, any tool will do. This is our most published project ever, and it's in the village, and it was 1988, and it's a $33,000 building. All about, making something out of nothing. A lot of buildings in the village, you don't even know there's been you hardly know there's been an architect involved. So moving out of the village now for the first time in this talk, here's a house in Chester, half an hour away. It's a kind of house within a house, like Charles Moore's Orinda House. Charles said to me one time, he said, when I graduated from Princeton, I only had one idea. He said there was one more idea than any of my classmates had. So anyway, we are inspired by him, obviously. So the room, a house inside of a house, pretty clear. This is a house just down the shore from the village called Mirror Point. And it's just a fishing shack extruded. It's a house for a fisherman's daughter from that community. Married to a very elegant European guy. So she keeps him in line. She keeps him down to earth. That's the partie drawing for that. And I think, in a way, that's my favorite, because there's a moment in designing when you're taking stock of what is, and then it transitions into what might be. There's a kind of an analytical drawing becomes a proposition. So this shows the sun, that's the 60-degree noontime on June 21st. You see the curve with the arrow, that's the It's the air, the wind. The air has form here. The bottom curved line is the topography. The trees are obviously oak trees, right? And you see the people under there. And whenever we go there, we have dinner under there. And the whole story was that the family, Grampy was a fisherman, a scallop fisherman, and he couldn't do stairs anymore, but he wanted to be able to sit in the shade and watch his grandchildren swimming. So it was all about that story. And when we were out in the country and you get terrible concrete, right? So at the front door, we got terrible concrete. You see the board form concrete there. So I said, okay, we'll take a piece of Corten, we'll wrap the door jamb where all that bad honeycombing is, and we'll we'll laser cut the heights of the children when the first day they went in the house. So there's where Grampy sits. And now we're doing it's weird, they didn't have any money, we did this, it was super cheap. It's a 16-foot White House. And then they did a little better economically, so now they have a 1750 manor house near London and Henley. So we're doing some buildings on that estate, which was a capability brown landscape, which is very cool to be able to work on. So yeah, so it's architect for life. That's always the deal with our clients. We're working with one family now 35 years. And now we're designing their tombstones. Architect for life. Dear architect for life. So you got to change that. It's architect for death now. So this one's all about the infatuation with the vernacular, the real vernacular, what they build bungalows out of, these gang nail trusses. So we mess with those a bit. And I was brought up on this book by Bernard Radowski called Architecture Without Architects. So the idea of the vernacular, the vernacular is what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong. There's nothing romantic about it. It's pragmatic, right? Anyway, so then we're still doing stuff on this little site too. So this is a barn we did. Just sat there one day in that summer kitchen and on one piece of paper drew this thing. This is a little house on the coast of Nova Scotia as well, all about surprise. You arrive and you think it's safe in there. And then that's the builder, by the way, a wonderful builder who takes people out of jail and teaches them to build, which is amazing. So he should get all the awards, not me. Anyway, so it's all about taking the energy, the found potential of the site, and this is a nothing building. There's nothing to it. It's even badly built. It's good that it's quite a ways from Halifax, from the airport, because the critics can't find it. So this is one we did 20 years ago, which is the first wedge, and it's a 12-foot White House. Won an AIA National Honor Award first time. That's the first sketch, sitting on the wharf with the client the first day, always the first day. Frank Lloyd Wright said, if you don't get an idea with the client the first day on the site, you're never going to get one. So I've trained myself to do this, to every time to sit with the client and do it together, and then a couple years later when they're living in there, they can hang it in the bathroom or whatever they want. There's the Anna doing the Vanna White thing, showing how the microclimate works. So there's Glenmarket, there's our son Matthew, who's now an architect. So there are a lot of these inexpensive little houses, and we're still in Nova Scotia. This is all about scissor trusses and how you can make an inverted skylight out of a scissor truss. This one's also just down the road. So when I said there's 40 in the village, there's probably 100 or more very close to the village. So this is called Two Halls House. All about the condition of under. you know, that we had a 200-year wave study, and the wave would take the building away no matter how much you spent on foundations. So this is all about letting the nature do what it wants to do. Those two sketches, the first one is drawn the first day on the site with the client. See the clients and me underneath, between the rock and the belly of the building. And then the one on the right is drawn after the building is built. And it's a metaphor, two hulls. Because I grew up around shipyards when you were playing in the sawdust under ships being built. In the middle 1800s, half of all the ships in the world were built in Nova Scotia. So here's the plan: living pavilion, sleeping pavilion. There's another one, the party, the project. When you live in the boonies, you don't have time to get confused. You just go make the sketch, you just go build it. It's another lean-to. Guy had a secret collection of muscle cars. A guy who was a helicopter mechanic, so he makes turbines, big wind turbines. So there's lots of power for this. He built 30 big wind turbines on the mountain above this house. This is not in Nova Scotia. This is the first one, but it's actually a precedent that we did a pool house in Quebec for a few years earlier, and then we did this house in Halifax, which is also a flat roof house, kind of inspired by the kind of elemental approach of the Barcelona Pavilion. This is a project we're doing now. It's still in Nova Scotia. It's called LLF, and it's our fourth client on this site. This is a sacred site for Indigenous people. It's the site that James Taylor and Carly Simon, remember when she wrote that song, You're So Vain? That's the site she had. So I've been trying to get people to do something there, and we finally got one built, and the client, don't want to blame the client, but this time the client really was a bit of a jerk, and he did ruin it. So I wanted to find a fourth person to buy the land so that he could bulldoze the house, and which essentially happened. So this is the guest house that is constructed now, and the main house is under construction. You see the sketch on the right. There's 3 buildings a kilometer apart on 3 different saltwater addresses. It's covered in, and so they are aligned, and the main house has a courtyard. Basically, the courtyard is subtracted and is taken a kilometer away and floated on posts. So everybody thinks that what they're working on now, the next project's going to be the good one. So I think this is the kind of fold-out paper doll thing. Here's the leaded copper envelope. This is a terrifying sight. When there's a storm, you're sure you're going to be washed away. It's the scariest place I've ever seen nature. So this is just a guest house, but to be continued. We just finished this little thing on top of a hill where an old couple in their 90s, proposed to one another. So this is a little room within a house, like a Scottish crofter's cottage with the thick wall. So an ode to Charles Moore, the St. John River. So this is the first one not in Nova Scotia. This is one in Virginia. I'm going to speed up. This is in Virginia. It's basically an oil platform, a platter above 50-foot high dunes on the coast of Virginia. And the idea is that we're building a village on top of that. Around a courtyard. The little cabins that are part of this long barn form thing. So it's flying above the dune. There's a house in the Hamptons we're doing now. So we're getting out of town a little bit now. She wanted a Hamptons traditional house, and he wanted Philip Johnson's glass house, so we had to find a way to do that. But earlier, we did this project, which is why they hired us, because they thought we could figure this out for them. butterfly collection. I've always been infatuated with the vernacular and the idea of theme and variation. And so we do this a lot. My background's in urban design, so this tells you how you might make a village out of things. So we've created a village on this island, and we've been working on it for 10 years, and we're going to get into another phase. And for that same client, Architect for Life, we're doing a restaurant, a hotel, and a house in New England for the same client. So this is Powder Mountain in Utah. Somebody found a little village we made at our farm, and they said, well, can we do that? So we built the first 15. We're going to build the next 15 now, little cabins in the mountain on stilts with bridges. So unless you're Santa Claus, you can't get in there in the wintertime because there's 60 feet of snow every year. So first sketch, first day about the building with the bridge. First sketch about the aggregation, how you make a village out of it. And then you get the village. This is a house right next to that. For the person that now owns the mountain. So this is a sketch I did with the client one day. He wanted to make a statement and she wanted to fit in. So we got the materials are the fitting in part, and so she's cool. And then he gets the crazy thing. You drop down into this thing and it's all cedar, every inch. I said, you want it all to be wood? And she said, what part of wood didn't you understand? So it's wood. And it's all about that focusing on the landscape. So you're used to building on the coast and framing the view, and then you get to the 9,000 feet in the mountains and it's the same, right? The totemic element in this is this 24-foot piece of soapstone that's actually the kitchen island from the other side. Next thing I'm going to show you is offices. So we started with the family, the village, the campus, and community, and now we're going to talk about practice. So the GHOST thing was about teaching, and so in terms of practice, we've always, out-of-work architects become developers. So whenever we didn't have any work, we'd build something. It's been quite a ride for Marilyn, who's not an architect. But her dad was crazier than me, so it kind of worked. But this is an office we built in a historic neighborhood that was going to be knocked down, and so we built 110% site coverage project. Too small for one house. We put 4 houses and an architecture office and an old gas station in the center of Halifax. So this was a way so that Dad, who was a workaholic, could be home when the kids came home from school. So we lived in the blue thing, and then we worked out of the gas station thing. Then we built one down the street when I formed a partnership with Talbot, made him a partner, so we needed more space. So we were going to double the firm, and we got this big box built by somebody who builds McDonald's restaurants. So temple of work, and to repair a neighborhood that was going to be knocked down. Built a bunch of townhouses. So we'd build an office and we'd build 4 houses to go with it. So we did that 4 or 5 times, and then we did it in Lunenburg. This is UNESCO World Heritage Town, and B2 Lofts is there in the center of it. And we did the same thing. I taught for 37 years, and the course I taught was called B2. It was a course number. So we built a project after the course number so that you practice what you preach, right? So this is one of our satellite offices, and I work in this every day. It's 20 minutes drive, 25 minutes, according to Marilyn, from our farm. So I get to go in the Shire town to work, and we have 6 apartments in there that we rent out. We didn't need any of this. It's crazy, right? But when you do real estate things, they actually can work out. If you don't, never about money, ever, ever, ever. But real estate's, they don't call it real estate for nothing, I guess. So this is a historic neighborhood. It's one of only 2 UNESCO towns in North America. The building on the left is new. I don't even like gambrel roofs, but there were 4 other ones on the city block, so what do? You just gotta do it. Forget about what you like or don't like. So these are the apartments, the Moby Dick kind of apartments. Then we built an office that wasn't with our money in Halifax. So our main office now is in this complex called Queen's Mark. And it's a mixed-use development in the center, the very center of the city, where below the fortress and where it meets the harbor, and to reconnect the boardwalk in the town. So this is the party drawing 10 years ago. The red lines are people. How do you make a public space? This is all about public space. 70% of the site is public open space. What developer does that? Pretty cool. We're also doing a whole bunch more projects with that developer because we become friends, you know, with architect for life, right? So this is that thing. There's a boutique hotel. There's a stair into the water. People, you know, it was brand new. People would go there, and people are very conservative in Nova Scotia. They said, architects, more money than brains. Look at this, what a stupid idea. And then 10 minutes later, they'd be swimming naked in the harbor. The same people. And this is local stone. It's local, whoopsie daisy, local stone. So here it's all about the people. It's all about, a lot of good public art that we got to do some of it, select the artists, other cases. Art gallery in New Brunswick, based on the idea of using New Brunswick stone now. Instead of Wallace sandstone, here we're using New Brunswick Dorchester sandstone next to the legislature. A university building in Prince Edward Island. So we finally got to do some public buildings. This is a university building. Whoops, that's not UP. This is a Brock University near Niagara Falls. The party is a section all about light, right? And the University of Toronto, a library. And there's, you know, I learned from Charles Moore about participatory design, and from Giancarlo De Carlo. I worked with him. He was a Team 10 architect in Italy. And De Carlo said, to serve is not to be a servant. And Charles Moore said, participation always works. So this is a drawing I'm making with 100 people in the room, trying to convince them that they all had this idea. So this is a systems building. This is an embassy in Bangladesh, all made out of bricks. It's right out at the street. The U.S. Embassy next door has a moat around it and razor wire and stuff. Because no one cares about Canada. No one thinks Canadians are gonna hurt anybody or something. I don't. So they call this the round building. And so when we did this building, we just bent a brick, because that Ganges Delta silt, brick, vernacular, use the local material culture. And the embassy, Canadian embassy, said, well, you can't do that because it's not spiffy enough. I said, well, if you don't build it out of what they know how to do right there, you're never going to afford it. So I went back 10 years later for the opening, but the night before gave a lecture to the architects in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And the building that we're in wasn't 90% brick like this, it was 100% brick. And it was so refreshingly cool and naturally ventilated. And I said to the client, he said, you're right about the bricks. I said, no, I said 90%. If we really had our act together, it would have been 100%, because last night I was in a much better building design with the vernacular in mind. So anyway, then we got to now we're doing an embassy in Australia, Canadian embassy. And really, I'm not really here to show you the project, but to show you this content. You know, architecture's all about finding meaning, finding content. So the idea we have here is there's a wall, and that wall is of Australia. It's made out of the Australian dirt, and there's a core at the back. It hits the ground. It's grounded. We have Aboriginal consultants and artists in Australia working on those bits with us. And the Canadian bit, you know, embassies has a guest and a host culture involved. So the guest is flown in. So we have Canadian Indigenous artist and Canadian Indigenous consultant. So the skin of the building, in Canada, copper is for Indigenous people is a diplomacy material. It's about gifting. And so we found this Indigenous, we had a process, the Canadian part of it, about what is meaningful. You know, is it that silly totem pole next to the front door that doesn't relate to 98% of Canadian Indigenous people? Is it the trees? Well, Canada's 4,000 miles wide, so a tree, there's no tree that's everywhere. So it doesn't make sense to all Indigenous people. The thing that does, though, is the cosmos, is the night sky. So, and it's the same in Australia. So we're going to make a copper skin on this thing, and we've commissioned an artwork by a Canadian Indigenous beadwork artist, and she is interested in the nebula. This is a Hubble telescope image. So what we're basically doing is we're sampling this image. Her artwork's going to be there, but the copper thing, when you're in there, you're looking up at it, so you're looking up at the sky. So that's, and tomorrow I'm meeting with Bill Zahner Metals, at his candy store. You know, Zahner Metals, that their patina plant is here in Dallas. So it's fantastic. So we're staying an extra day, going to design this envelope with Bill Zahner in Dallas here. Okay, so home and not at home. I don't want to give you the idea that bigger is better or home is not as interesting as international work. But as an architect, you have to travel. You have to. This was a drawing I did in Mali in the Sahara Desert. Went there with Rick Joy, Wendell Burnett, Tom Kundig, Marilyn Blackwell in Maryland a few years ago. And you had to move fast because it was a little dangerous. So you had to draw fast. So I learned to draw fast by driving in a fast-moving automobile. So these last two slides, I'm going to say a couple things. So teachers. If you want to change the world, you should be a teacher. But I always thought, I'd rather be on the ice than on the bench. I'd rather be a hockey player than a coach. But if you really want to change the world, you should be a teacher. So teachers and mentors. This is Charles Moore on the right, at home with our two daughters and our dog. I mentioned DeCarlo, I've mentioned Glenn Murcutt. Respecting the elders, right? So, and this is Marilyn and me in Istanbul a couple years ago. So, being a citizen of the world and being a person in your village is all one thing. There's only one world, and for me, the world involves teaching and practice and family and community all together. An ethic of cultivation rather than consumption, and a democratic ethos. All culture comes from the poor. And as Alvar Aalto said, all of architecture is a search for paradise on earth. I'm going to end with a little tiny story. I don't know the author's names. A French writer in the 1700s wrote a story about the Bastille, you know, the prison. And it goes that this young prisoner is in this big cell with all these other people, and they spend their lives there. And so there's one window way up high, and that's the berth for the elder. The oldest prisoner gets to be there. So every morning the young people say, "What do you see when the sun comes up? What do you see out that window?" And that person would say, well, the sun is shining, the sheep are in the fields, and the world is as it should be. So sooner or later, the young guy gets to be the old guy. So he wakes up the first morning by the window, and of course, it's just a wall, right? There's nothing. So they say, what's happening? And so he says, the sun is shining, the sheep are in the fields, and everything is as it should be. So I think when times are rough, like right now, it's all the more important to be optimistic. So we're in the optimism business as architects, as Johanni pointed out. And that role of the teacher is that role. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.